Capital Record, where we defend free enterprise and capital markets because we believe in the dignity of the human person. Hello and welcome to David Bonson's Capital Record, brought to you by National Review. And I called an audible today. I had a topic I was excited to address. Still am excited, and I'm planning to do it in either our next episode or episode after that, related to industrial policy and two big mistakes that a lot of people make around this issue. One becoming more of a right-wing mistake and one a very long-standing left-wing mistake. But I instead am going to talk about the issue of Fed independence because the President of the United States has made it a bigger issue. And I believe that monetary policy is something that we've really discussed quite a bit over the last 4 years in Capital Record. I am obsessed with monetary economics. I think it's a very important part of a thorough understanding of macroeconomics and a thorough understanding of what I believe ought to be a proper vision for capital markets, wherein capital is ideally and optimally left alone to pursue its best rational use. I favor a very low intervention in monetary policy. And so from time to time, I might be critical of a Federal Reserve that's interventionist, which is to say every Federal Reserve I've really had. Some have become far more interventionist than in the past. But the point being, we have an aggressive mandate for a central bank here in our country. And I'm one who believes we should have a central bank, but should have a very, very humble role, primarily functioning as a lender of last resort, which is what the Fed was actually created for out of late 19th century economic disturbances. But the Fed has become this all-purpose economic arbiter that I think is very unhealthy for a free society and very distortive, and therefore gets in the way of the optimal and most rational use and pursuit of capital, and therefore jeopardizes the very thing I want out of capital markets, which is for them to function as a means to an end. And this brings up the issue of the president's role in this. Historically, people on the left and right of all varying different opinions about central bank have believed that the Fed ought to be very depoliticized. And most criticism comes when one believes that the Fed either can't be depoliticized, which is a very fair view, or is not depoliticized enough. My own view is it is pretty much impossible for there to be 0% politicization, but that we ought to try. And that certainly structurally, the guardrails are already in place. For example, the President of the United States doesn't set monetary policy, and the President of the United States can't fire the Chairman of the Federal Reserve. They do nominate them. They have to be confirmed by the Senate. We have separation of powers that are at play, and this is all codified in the Federal Reserve Act. But the president can, even though the chairman is a federal employee, the president can only fire the chairman or chairwoman for gross malfeasance, not for disagreement, not for desire for different policy. No limiting principle would be there. That would just mean the president is the de facto Fed chair. That's not the way the system works. This is an example where I have to be critical of the president, and I am very happy to be complimentary of the president when he talked about corporate tax reform and did corporate tax reform, the most meaningful corporate tax reform of my lifetime in 2017. I'm happy to be complimentary of efforts at deregulation and energy independence. And I know there's got to be something else in the grab bag that I could go to. But lately, there's been criticism of tariffs for very good reason, both as a matter of economic policy and a matter of extremely sloppy execution. But today, there's just something basic ideological on the table, which is the idea that the President of the United States should be bullying around the Fed chair. Now, let's put the manners side of it on the table. What he did is he went on social media and said the Chairman Powell was a total loser. And that's a little bit better than in 2017 or 18 when he said he was a bigger enemy of the United States than President Xi of communist China. This sort of jawboning and social media bullying, first of all, Chairman Powell doesn't respond to it. He makes mistakes. There's so much I could say to be critical of him, but not one of those things would be criticizing his intent or his earnestness or sincerity. He does have private markets experience. He is a monetary intellectual, but he is, unlike Bernanke, Greenspan, Yellen, not a pure academic. But there's just a bunch I'm happy to say I disagree with them on. And I think the Fed should be loosening, and I think the Fed is loosening. And the big irony here is what the president wants them to do is exactly what he is doing. But in May right now, we see an 89% chance in the futures market that the Fed's going to sit on their hands and an 11% chance of cutting. And I'm sure the president wishes he would cut. Now, I believe they should cut because I think that there's monetary lags and that the economy is worsening and that monetary policy is too tight. Maybe 300 basis points is too much to think they're going to cut, but another 50 to 100 is going to happen. And I don't think they need to wait until June. The odds of them beginning to cut in June right now are over 70%. So that seems to more than likely be what the president's actually upset about. Because again, when you look at the futures curve, in December, right now we have a 425 basis point Fed funds rate, and the odds are most likely that we're going to be 350 or 370 or 325 or even 300, different odds on each of those. But basically, bare minimum 3 more cuts, very, very likely 4 cuts, with an over 20% chance of 5 cuts between now and the end of the year. So we're not talking about a Fed that is expected to be overly hawkish through the end of the year. We're really just talking about the next 30 days. So the president could be right or wrong as to what they should do in May. And I think if he is wanting them to cut, there's absolutely no chance they'll do it now when it would look like they just were responding to the name calling and getting bullied. But I don't really care that much, nor should you, about whether or not the Fed cuts in May versus June. The president and the Fed are not on a different page about the direction of monetary policy. They're planning on cutting. The president wants them to cut. All they're off on is the exact timing and magnitude, perhaps. But my point is, when the president does this, do we believe that there should be central banking decisions, mainly the setting of the price of money, by the president of the United States? And if so, I would like you to tell me a president of the United States you think would not favor lower interest rates always. And I'd like you to tell me this president of the United States. Will there ever be any circumstance? The federal funds rate was 0% in 2017, and he brought it up to 1.5%. And President Trump was furious that he was raising rates, and we were at 1%. And so President Trump is very honest about the fact he just permanently likes easy money and low rates. He's a real estate developer who lives on the edge on the precipice of high leverage. I have no surprise at all in the fact that he wants low rates. But there is a reason why we generally don't want politicians to be involved in setting the price of money. Now, I don't want a central banker to be involved in the setting of price of money. That's the irony here. I'm not fighting for the chairman of the Federal Reserve's rights to have the very elevated stature they have in administration of monetary policy. I'm fighting against the president having it. I'm fighting against a system that isn't ideal as it is becoming far worse. The politicization of the Fed goes the wrong way with what those of us who want to depoliticize the Fed, with those of us who want a less interventionist Fed, a less distortive Fed would go. There's no rationale for this. It's illegal, and it is very bad policy economically. It is bad politics, and ultimately, in this particular case, it's entirely unnecessary because the Fed and the president aren't even at odds as to what they want to happen. Those of us who believe in a monetary policy that is less interventionist, less distortive, do not want the president, whether we like the president or not, whether they're in our party or not. From Bill Clinton, who tried to kind of weigh on Greenspan a little bit in the mid 90s, to the, I think President Bush Jr. largely stayed out of the hair of both Greenspan and Bernanke. But there's no question that at that point, going from Greenspan into Bernanke and the financial crisis, that the Fed took on a very, very outsized role in quantitative easing and many, many years of zero interest rate policy, and then a ridiculous interpretation of Section 13.3 of the Federal Reserve Act, allowing under exigent circumstances significant bandwidth of the Fed to intervene and do more. All of this has taken off here in the last 15 years. We are not going, if the president wanted to use his bully pulpit for some reform of the Fed, then it ought to be on a more humble Fed, a less interventionist Fed, a less aggressive and active Fed, a less discretionary Fed, not the Fed responding to what the president is asking them to do, which is the wrong way to go. It further deifies and centralizes power in the central bank and creates an accord of power between the executive branch and the Fed. It's not going to end well. Thank you for listening to David Bahnsen's Capital Record.